Less than 50% of houses sold at auction over the weekend, which is the lowest since COVID. Consumer confidence is at its lowest level in 50 years. The 18.6-year land cycle is close to peaking. Dashdot, one of the largest buyers agents in Australia, has just gone into liquidation, citing the budget as a reason for their cash flow problems, and left nearly 700 clients chasing them for their money. And now SMSF lending has just been removed. As someone who's bought close to 1,000 properties for clients over the last 5 years and is buying properties every day, let's break this down. We'll cover what's actually happening in the market based on the latest data and from what I'm hearing from agents on the ground each day. I'll also show you my heat test framework, which you can do in 30 seconds on realestate.com.au, and you can see in real time what the buyer demand is in any market. So let's break this down and look at a recent CBA report to summarise the current market. CBA have the most financial data of any single company in Australia, so they are best positioned to take the best guess. And CBA have recently published a report stating their downgrade of the Aussie market. And the reasons they give for this downgrade is mainly that interest rates are higher and they're at their highest level in 4 or 5 years. Negative gearing has also just been adjusted and removed effectively from the 1st of July 2027. And then the consumer sentiment is at a 50-year low. So people think that it's a bad time to make a big financial decision, aka buy a house. If you look a little deeper into the report, you'll see that they are predicting widely that house prices will fall, although some markets will still rise. So the reason that that is the case is because interest rates and the changes to negative gearing, essentially they influence the same thing, which is affordability. So as interest rates rise, so do people's mortgages. So borrowing power goes down because you now have a larger expense because your mortgage repayment has gone up. And so the property that you can afford to buy has now gone down. Some people, because of the rise in interest rates, will now not be able to afford any property, but most people can afford to buy less property. Now, and the changes to negative gearing have the same influence. They reduce the borrowing power of someone because they are increasing their expenses, because you would previously be able to get tax back from any losses, which is income, and now that has effectively been removed. So if everyone can borrow less, then affordability kind of cascades down. So a useful way to think about it is like a ladder. So if you've got kind of the top of the ladder, which will be, say 1 to 1.5 million, this would be where interest rates would have the largest impact because it's where borrowing power would be the most stretched for most Australians. So this is the area or the part of the market that I think will see the largest falls because it's the most influence. You've got kind of the middle market, which I would say differs slightly from city to city, but around sort of 750 to 1,000 to 1 million. Now here, I would say it's kind of less impacted because you've still got some affordability for a good portion of Australians. And then you've also got the 5% deposit scheme applying to first home buyers here. But I'd say investors are now less likely to be active in this market because they're gonna sort of be more interested in the lower price points where you traditionally have a higher yield, more cash flow, because that's going to be more important to them. So in that price bracket, which would be the bottom of the kind of ladder, you would still see the first home buyers who can afford it, and you've also got investors now pretty much skewed largely to that portion of the market because that's where they're going to get the highest cash flow, which is now even more important because of the removal of negative gearing. Really, you're going to see, I believe, the largest falls in the top end. The middle is probably going to hold, and then the bottom end is potentially not going to see too much impact at all. But affordability is only kind of one influence on house price growth, and it's obviously an important one, but it's not the only one. So at DealSource, we have our asset framework to assess any potential property. So A is for affordability. So majority of people who live in an area, we want to see them not spending more than 30% of their income, the average income in that area, on housing or rents. We also want the area to be supply constrained. So we need current housing be very low. We need sort of future housing represented by building approvals in the area to be low. And then medium term, we also want to be in a kind of landlocked area where there's no potential for future supply or limited potential for future supply. So that means we've got a very supply constrained market. We also want really strong cash flow. So, we need good rental income. We want obviously no high insurance costs. Obviously with things like bushfire and flood premiums in certain areas would be not what we would consider. We also need a strong economy that's diverse, doesn't have any single dependencies on any industries, and is ideally going through a injection of infrastructure spend to create more jobs in the short to medium term as well, to drive more population growth and migration to the area. We also need it to be tightly held by owner occupiers who are the majority of the participants in the market and generally don't sell often. We look at like a 70-30 split. So whilst affordability is certainly an important influence on some markets, and without it you are very unlikely to have sustained price growth, it's only one influence. This asset framework is also something that we can use to assess any client's existing properties as well, to see maybe it's time to sell. Like if you've had loads of price growth and now the area is not that affordable, for example, for the local participants in the market, it might be likely that you're not going to get much price growth any further, and you might look to exit that asset and then move to another one. But that's a separate video. So now we know why prices might still rise. Let's look at some examples to back this up.
All right, so let's show you what's actually happening so you don't catch a falling knife in this very patchy market across Australia. So what I've got in front of me here is the CoreLogic Mapping the Market tool. And this shows the change in values. We're looking at houses here over the last 3 months. So I'm recording this at the end of July. So it includes sort of April, May, June data, including the 2 months with the budget changes that have happened. So what you can see here on the left is the key, which shows you that this sort of orange is -6 to -3% growth, and then as we come up to the dark blue, that would be 6% plus growth. So basically blue is good, orange is bad. Now if we look around this sort of north area of Sydney, we'll go to somewhere like Eastwood, amazing Korean food, but yeah, they have had a fall of 7.93% over the last 3 months. Now that's over the last 3 months. So if you annualize that, you multiply it by 4, that is what, like 32% potentially, if that trend continues. So you can see why we might be on the cards for one of the biggest corrections in Australian property. However, that is not the full story. As we've discussed, there's many influence on the property market, and if we look at a more affordable area with some of the more favourable demand and supply factors like Darwin, you can see, well, this Darwin is all completely dark blue. So let's look at a couple of suburbs here. So Anula, probably saying this completely wrong, Marara, Wangaroo. Lena has grown at 7.4% over the last 3 months. So on an annualized basis, that is getting on for 28% plus. So you can see the massive divergence in the current performance of the property market in different sections. And this is why it's obviously just really short-sighted to look at one headline and say property prices are falling, because that's just not the case. So that shows you what's happening over the last 3 months, including after the budget. Now, what about if you wanted to look at what's kind of happening now in the market? So to do that, we can look at real estate and use what I call Jono's heat test framework. So if we pull up real estate, and I'm going to look in the same area, Eastwood, and I'm going to include the surrounding suburbs. I'm going to make sure I'm just looking for houses. All right, so we've got 361 properties roughly. Now, the way we can tell how hot the market is right now is we can look at how many of those properties that are for sale are already under offer. So this will give us a guide. So if we're looking at a sort of hot market, it would be over 35%. Sort of a balanced market, reasonably warm, would be sort of 10 to 35%, and then a rubbish market would be sort of less than 10%. So if we just toggle here, I'll just move myself to the bottom and you go exclude properties under contract, you'll see basically hardly any. Yeah, so it was 8 properties. So of 361, there was 353 that are still for sale. So as a percentage, that is it's like 3%. So really, really poor. Now, if we go look at that area in Darwin, include the surrounding areas. So we've got 92 properties. I need to move myself, and then we go exclude properties under contract. So you see 31 or so of the properties, so over 30, about 35%, which is insane. So that shows you the vast difference between those two property markets. Of the 90 or so properties that are listed in this pocket of Northern Territory, already nearly a third or maybe over a third are under offer.
If you want any help making sense of this market, whether it might be a good time to buy, sell, then please feel free to reach out. I'll put the link in the description.